Welcome to today's lesson, which is about common errors with exponents. The goals of today's lesson are that you develop an awareness of the common errors people make with exponents and that you develop a strategy or different strategies, a couple of strategies for not making these errors. So here's the first error. X to the power of 4 times x to the power of 5 is not x to the power of 20. And here we are looking at the product of powers. And the product of powers says that when we multiply two powers with the same base, we add the exponents. So we've got the same base, both x. We should have x to the power of 9. And so one strategy I've used here is to write out the property I'm using and to very purposefully think about that property as I'm using it. I said when I multiply two powers with the same base, I add the exponents, and then I did that. Another strategy I could use would be to expand my exponents, so x to the power of 4 times x to the power of 5, and I will see that I actually have x to the power of 9, which is in line with what I said about the product of powers property, so I can be sure that this is incorrect. Similarly, people forget that there is a 1 here. It's a given when you see no exponent that it's x to the power of 1. And so when I say similarly, this is product of powers as well, and it should be x to the power of 5. And then you have the quotient of powers, which is similar to the product of powers. When you're dividing two powers with the same base, subtract the exponent in the denominator from the exponent in the numerator. So we should have 2 to the power of 12 minus 4, which is 2 to the power of 8. And we could prove that by expanding all the 2's, and we could also write out quotient of powers and say what this quotient of powers means, and very mindfully do the math according to the quotient of powers. So here's another error. So we've seen the quotient of, or the product of powers, and so we might think, oh, I'll add the exponents here. But really, everything within the parentheses is squared. We have x to the power of 4 times x to the power of 4. We could expand it all the ways out, and we would get x to the power of 8. And so it's not x to the power of 6. And we can also write the name of the property power of a power. And that is when we see an exponent within a parenthesis and another one outside. That's power of a power. Here we have an error, and we have power of a product. And that is when we have two numbers multiplied together, that's a product. And the exponent on the outside applies to everything within the parentheses. So that should be 4 cubed times 2 cubed. Or we could multiply what's in the parentheses first, and we would get 8 cubed. So either of those would be correct, but what we have here on top is not correct. We have a similar situation with power of a quotient, and really the quotient or the exponent applies to everything within the parentheses, so we should have 3 squared over 4 squared, and not just 3 squared over 4. And that is power of a quotient. Here we have a 0 exponent, and the rule for a 0 exponent is any non-zero number our variable to the power of 0 equals 1. So 2 to the power of 0 equals 1. Here we have a negative exponent, and the negative 3 applies to the 2, and so when we bring it below the fraction bar, we should have 2 to the power of 3, which is correct here, but there's a 2 left on top, which is really 2 to the power of 1, and that's incorrect. What we have is 1 over 2 to the power of 3. To prevent yourself from making this error, you can go 1 times 2 to the negative 3. Now we know to move 2 to the negative 3 below the fraction bar, and we're left with the 1 on top. When we multiply by 1 here, we did not change the value of the expression. Anything multiplied by 1 is unchanged. So now we have 1 over 2, to the power of 3. That negative should not be there. 1 over 2 to the power of 3. And here we have 2x to the negative 3, all moved down below the fraction bar, and that's not correct. The negative 3 only applies to the x, the exponent of negative 3. So we have 2x to the negative 3. This is what I recommend you do. Separate them out. And so you're left with 2 in the numerator and x to the power of 3 in the denominator. When you move it below the fraction bar, the exponent sign changes. So here are some of the exponent rules on this slide. The exponent applies only to the number or variable or parentheses immediately to the left of it. And then we have the product of powers rule, the quotient of powers, power of a power. You can pause the video and read these and take notes. And there are 4 more rules that you have seen: power of a product, power of a quotient, zero exponent, and negative exponent. And again, you can pause the video and take notes. So some strategies: make a list of the exponent rules in your study guide and refer to them. As you work on an exponents problem, think about what property is relevant. So for example, when we saw the product of powers, x times 4 times x times 5, we actually said product of powers. And we said, okay, when we multiply 2 powers with the same base, we add the exponent. So now that I've said that, written it out, I know that I should add, and it should be x to the power of 9. Another strategy was to expand exponents to check your work. So in this example here, we could expand. So we have x to the power of 4 times x to the power of 5, and we can see that it's x to the power of 9. And also, you can reflect on your personal practices. Do you really know the exponent rules? But there are just 1 or 2 common errors that you commonly make. Maybe stop when you see these types of questions. Maybe it's the zero exponent, or maybe when you see x, you forget that it's x to the power of 1. Whatever it is, look when you start a problem. Is there an x here with no exponent and I should mark in a 1? Or is it a situation where it's x to the power of 0 and like, oh, this is where I make a common mistake? Like, note your common mistakes and check at the beginning of each question. Is this the type of question where I make a mistake? And slow down and check your work as you do it to make sure you don't make the error. So today you saw different types of errors people make with exponents, and hopefully you developed some strategies for yourself for not making these errors. And that's the end of today's lesson.